The starship Nebula Seeker glided through the inky void of space, its sleek hull reflecting the distant starlight. Thomas Rain stood at the viewport, his green eyes wide with awe as he took in the massive vessel that would be his home for the foreseeable future. The ship was a marvel of engineering, a floating city designed to house thousands of crew members from various species across the Galactic Union. As the shuttle docked, Thomas's heart raced with anticipation. At 28, he was one of the youngest human engineers to be selected for this elite research team. He'd worked his ass off to get here, but a nagging doubt gnawed at him. Humans were still seen as the new kids on the galactic block, despite their rapid advancements in science and technology. The airlock hissed open, and Thomas stepped onto the main deck. A cacophony of alien languages assaulted his ears as crew members of various species bustled about their duties. He caught snippets of conversations in Standard Galactic, the lingua franca of the Union, but many spoke in their native tongues. A towering crayon, its four arms moving in perfect coordination, bumped into Thomas. The alien's compound eyes narrowed. "Watch where you're going, human," it chittered in Standard Galactic. Thomas bit back a retort. No need to make enemies on his first day. He straightened his uniform and made his way to the central hub, where new crew members were to report for duty assignments. The hub was a massive circular room with a ceiling dome of transparent alloy that offered a breathtaking view of space. Holographic displays flickered with ship diagnostics and star charts. In the center stood a striking figure that made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. Commander Thea towered over the other crew members, her silver-blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights. Her long black hair was pulled back in a severe braid, accentuating her sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes. Those eyes, a swirling mix of deep purple and electric blue, seemed to cut right through him as she turned her gaze on the new arrivals. "Welcome aboard the Nebula Seeker," she said, her voice a low, melodious alto that sent a shiver down Thomas's spine. "I am Commander Thea of the Zirin. You are here because you are the best in your fields. But make no mistake. Your previous accomplishments mean nothing here. You will be pushed to your limits and beyond. The galaxy does not suffer fools or weaklings." Her gaze swept over the group, lingering for a moment on Thomas. He felt a jolt of electricity run through him, unable to look away from those mesmerizing eyes. "You have been assigned to your departments," Thea continued. "Report to your section leaders immediately." Dismissed, the crowd dispersed, but Thomas found himself rooted to the spot. Thea's eyes narrowed as she approached him. "Is there a problem, Ensign?" She trailed off, waiting for him to supply his name. Thomas snapped to attention. "Rain, ma'am. Thomas Rain, Engineering Department." "Ah, yes. The human prodigy," Thea said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I've read your file. Impressive for your species, I suppose. But don't let it go to your head. You have much to prove here." Thomas bristled at the backhanded compliment but kept his voice steady. "I intend to, Commander. I didn't come here to be a token human. I'm here to work." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed across Thea's face before her expression hardened again. "We'll see, Ensign Rain. Report to Chief Engineer Zach Suth and don't be late for your shifts. I run a tight ship." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving Thomas to stare after her. A mix of frustration and fascination churning in his gut. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Thomas settled into his new role. The engineering bay was a maze of pulsing conduits and humming machinery, alien tech far beyond what he'd worked with on Earth. But Thomas was nothing if not adaptable. He threw himself into his work, determined to prove his worth. Chief Engineer Zach Suth, a gruff Valerian with iridescent scales and 6 limbs, initially regarded Thomas with skepticism. But as the days passed, even the alien had to admit that the human was quick on his feet. "Not bad, Rain," Zach Suth rumbled one day as they recalibrated the quantum drive for a mammal. "You've got a decent grasp of non-linear physics." Thomas grinned, taking the backhanded compliment in stride. "Thanks, Chief. I've been studying Zirin theoretical models in my off hours." "Fascinating stuff." Zach's multifaceted eyes blinked in surprise. "Zirin physics? That's well beyond your species' current understanding." "Maybe," Thomas shrugged. but I've always been a fast learner." As he worked, Thomas couldn't help but notice the way the other crew members, particularly the non-humans, watched him, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. He'd known it would be like this. Humans were still seen as upstarts in the galactic community, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. One afternoon, as Thomas was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning plasma conduit, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Commander Thea looming above, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "Ensign Rain," she said, her voice cool. "I require a status update on the drive core modifications." Thomas scrambled to his feet, wiping his hands on a rag. "Of course, Commander, we've made significant progress on the recalibrations. The quantum drive should be fully operational by tomorrow. Increased efficiency by 12% and reduced power consumption by 8%. I've been working on a new algorithm that I think could push those numbers even higher." Thea raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest crossing her face. "Show me." Thomas pulled up a holographic display, his fingers flying over the controls as he explained his theory. As he spoke, he noticed something strange. Thea's eyes, usually so sharp and focused, seemed to glaze over for a moment. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if to clear it. "Commander, are you all right?" Thomas asked, concerned and overriding his usual caution around her. Thea's eyes snapped back to his, and for a split second, Thomas could have sworn he saw a flash of hunger, but it was gone so quickly he must have imagined it. "I'm fine, Ensign," she said, her voice slightly strained. "Your work is adequate. Continue." She turned to leave, but as she did, Thomas felt a strange pressure in his head, a whisper of a thought that wasn't his own. Fascinating creature. Thomas blinked, startled. Had he imagined that too? As the days passed, Thomas noticed more oddities in Thea's behavior. She seemed to be everywhere he turned, those piercing eyes following his movements. Her usual icy demeanor thawed slightly, her voice taking on a softer edge when she spoke to him. The rest of the crew noticed too. Whispers and curious glances followed Thomas through the corridors. "What did you do to get on the Ice Queen's good side?" his bunkmate, a jovial Tyrellian named Kix, asked one night. Thomas shrugged, genuinely puzzled. "Nothing. I'm just doing my job." Kix chuckled, his antenna twitching with amusement. "Well, whatever it is, keep it up. I've never seen her like this. It's like watching a glacier melt." But it wasn't just Thea's demeanor that was changing. Strange things began happening around the ship. Gravity fluctuations in the corridors, unexplained equipment malfunctions, and most bizarrely, crew members reporting sudden intrusive thoughts that didn't seem to be their own. Thomas was in the mess hall when the first major incident occurred. He was sitting with Kix and a few other junior officers when suddenly, every piece of cutlery on their table rose into the air, hovering for a moment before clattering back down. "What the hell was that?" Thomas exclaimed, looking around wildly. Before anyone could answer, a wave of something washed over them. Thomas gasped as a flood of alien emotions crashed through his mind. Desire, frustration, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of need. As quick as it came, the sensation vanished. Thomas looked up to see Commander Thea standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, Thomas knew with certainty that she was the source of the disturbance. Thea turned and fled, leaving a wake of confused and frightened crew members behind her. The ship buzzed with speculation after that. Rumors flew about what was happening to the commander. Some said she was ill, others whispered about possession by some unknown cosmic entity. Thomas threw himself into his work, trying to make sense of it all, but he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow he was at the center of whatever was happening to Thea. His suspicions were confirmed a week later during a crucial staff meeting. The ship's senior officers were gathered in the conference room, discussing the strange occurrences and how to proceed. Thea stood at the head of the table, looking more disheveled than Thomas had ever seen her. Her hair was coming loose from its usual tight braid, and there was a wild look in her eyes. "We must maintain order," she was saying, her voice strained. "These incidents are merely a result of passing through an unusual area of space. There is no cause for—" She broke off suddenly, her eyes locking onto Thomas. The room seemed to tilt, and Thomas felt that alien presence in his mind again, stronger this time. Want, need, must have. Thea's eyes widened and hardened as she realized what was happening. "No," she whispered. "Not now. Not him. Suddenly, every object in the room not bolted down began to float. The other officers cried out in alarm, grabbing onto their chairs. "Commander, Chief Medical Officer Doctor," Laxa shouted, "you must control yourself." But Thea seemed beyond hearing. Her eyes were fixed on Thomas, swirling with a maelstrom of emotion. The air crackled with energy, and Thomas felt himself being pulled toward her by an invisible force. Acting on instinct, Thomas did the only thing he could think of. He reached out and grabbed Thea's hand. The moment their skin touched, the chaos stopped. Everything dropped back to the floor with a crash. Thea gasped, her eyes clearing as she stared at Thomas in shock. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thea yanked her hand away and fled the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake as the other officers erupted into panic discussion. Thomas stared at his hand, still tingling from the contact. What the hell was going on? He didn't know it yet, but in that moment everything had changed. The real adventure was just beginning. The days following the incident in the conference room were tense. Thomas couldn't shake the memory of Thea's touch, the electric connection that had surged between them. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to those swirling, mesmerizing eyes. Itself seemed to be reeling from the aftermath. Systems malfunctioned at random, gravity shifted unpredictably, and crew members reported increasingly bizarre occurrences. Thomas found himself constantly on call, racing from one crisis to another. "Rain," Chief Engineer Zach Liss's voice crackled over the comm. "We've got a problem in the quantum drive chamber. Get down here now." Thomas sprinted through the corridors, dodging floating debris and confused crew members. He skidded into the drive chamber to find chaos. Equipment whirled through the air, caught in a localized gravity storm. At the center of it all stood Commander Thea, her eyes unfocused and her hair writhing as if alive. "Commander!" Thomas shouted, fighting against the pull of the vortex. "You need to stop this!" Thea's gaze snapped to him, and for a moment the storm intensified. Thomas felt himself lifted off his feet, pulled inexorably towards her. "Stay back!" Thea snarled, but there was fear beneath the anger in her voice. I can't control it." Thomas reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Like before, the contact sent a shock through both of them. The gravity well collapsed, sending everything crashing to the floor. Thea stumbled and Thomas caught her before she could fall. For a brief moment she leaned into him, her body trembling. Then she stiffened and pushed him away. "This never happened," she hissed, straightening her uniform. "Return to your duties, Ensign." She stormed out, leaving Thomas to deal with the aftermath. As he helped Zach and the others set the drive chamber to rights, his mind raced. What was happening to Thea, and why did he seem to be the only one who could calm her? Later that night, unable to sleep, Thomas found himself in the ship's library. He pulled up everything he could find on Zuran physiology and culture, determined to unravel the mystery. As he scrolled through dense texts and esoteric diagrams, a name caught his eye. Elis. He leaned in, reading intently. "The Elis is a rare and dangerous condition affecting Zuran females," the text read. "Occurring once a decade, it is characterized by intense emotional and physiological changes, including loss of control over psionic abilities. If left untreated, the Elis can lead to mental breakdown and even death." Thomas's blood ran cold. This had to be what was affecting Thea, but why now? And why did she seem to react so strongly to him? He dug deeper, searching for any mention of treatment or cure. What he found made his jaw drop. The only known resolution for the Elis is the completion of the sacred mating ritual with a compatible partner. However, Zuran cultural law dictates that only those who have passed the grueling trials of ascension may be considered worthy mates. Thomas sat back, his mind reeling. Thea needed a mate to survive this, but her own cultural rules were preventing her from finding one. Somehow, he was getting caught in the crossfire of her condition. Over the next few days, Thomas found himself constantly in Thea's orbit. Whether by chance or some unconscious pull, they seemed to end up in the same places at the same times. Each encounter was charged with an undeniable tension. In the mess hall, Thea's hand brushed against his as they reached for the same dish. A jolt of electricity passed between them, and every piece of cutlery on the table rattled. During a routine inspection, They found themselves alone in a turbolift. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Thomas could hear Thea's rapid breathing and could almost feel the heat radiating from her body. Suddenly, the lift jerked to a halt between decks. "Damn it!" Thea muttered, reaching for the control panel. As she did, she lost her balance, falling against Thomas. He caught her instinctively, and for a moment they were pressed together, faces inches apart. Thea's eyes locked onto his, swirling with a mix of desire and frustration. For a wild moment, Thomas thought she might kiss him. Then the lift shuddered back to life, and Thea practically leapt away from him. "This is inappropriate," she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual steel. "You will keep your distance, Ensign." But even as she said it, Thomas could feel the pull between them, an invisible force drawing them together. As the days passed, Thomas found himself torn. He couldn't deny the attraction he felt towards Thea, her strength, her intelligence, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. It all called to him in a way no one ever had before. But was it real, or was he just caught up in the throes of her Ellis? And even if his feelings were genuine, how could anything come of it? She was his commanding officer, not to mention a member of a species that saw humans as barely more than clever animals. Thomas confided in Kix, needing to unburden himself to someone. "You're playing with fire, my friend," the Tyrellian warned, his antenna twitching with concern. "Zurin aren't known for their warm and fuzzy nature, even at the best of times. And if what you've learned about this Ellis is true, well, you could be in real danger." "I know," Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But I can't just stand by and watch her suffer. There has to be something we can do." Kix regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I may know someone who can help, but you didn't hear it from me. Got it?" That someone turned out to be... Dr. Laxon, the ship's chief medical officer, an Andorian, was initially reluctant to discuss Thea's condition, citing patient confidentiality. But when Thomas explained what he discovered about the Elsic, her demeanor changed. "So, you figured it out," she said, her antenna drooping slightly. "I was hoping we'd have more time before it came to this." "Is there anything we can do?" Thomas asked, leaning forward eagerly. "Some way to help her through this without the mating ritual?" Dr. Laxon shook her head. "I've been researching since the symptoms first appeared. There are treatments that can mitigate the effects somewhat, but nothing that can fully suppress the Elsic. And the longer it goes on, the more dangerous it becomes, not just for the commander, but for everyone on this ship." Thomas's heart sank. "So, what do we do?" The doctor fixed him with a piercing gaze. "Ensign Rain, it may depend on you. The commander's reaction to you is unprecedented. In all my years studying xenobiology, I've never seen a Zirin respond to another species the way she responds to you." Thomas felt a flush creep up his neck. "But I'm human. Surely I can't be compatible." "In theory, no," Dr. Laxon admitted. "But the universe is full of surprises. And right now, you may be the commander's best hope for survival." The implications of her words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He stumbled out of the medical bay, his mind whirling. Could he really be the key to saving Thea? And if so, what would it mean for both of them? He didn't have long to ponder these questions. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with Thea herself. She looked awful. Her silver blue skin had taken on a sickly hue, and her eyes were fever bright. "Ensign Rain," she said, her voice hoarse, "I need to speak with you in private." Before he could respond, she grabbed his arm and dragged him into a nearby storage compartment. The door hissed shut behind them, leaving them in dim, emergency lighting. "Commander, what's going on?" Thomas asked, trying to ignore the way his skin tingled where she touched him. Thea paced the small space like a caged animal. "I know you've been investigating, asking questions about my condition." Thomas swallowed hard. "I was worried about you, about the ship." She whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "You had no right. This is a private matter, a cultural taboo that's killing you," Thomas interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "Commander, I know about the Elsic. I know what you need to survive it." Thea froze, her expression a mix of shock and something else. Was it hope? But then her face hardened. "You know nothing," she spat. "You're a human. You could never understand the complexities of Xeran physiology or culture." "Maybe not," Thomas conceded. "But I understand enough to know that you're in danger, that the whole ship is in danger if we don't find a way to help you." Thea's shoulders slumped, the fight seeming to drain out of her. "There is no help," she whispered. "No compatible mate. No way to complete the ritual. I am lost." The defeat in her voice tore at Thomas's heart. Without thinking, he stepped forward and took her hand. The now familiar jolt of energy passed between them, but this time neither pulled away. What if there was a way?" Thomas said softly. "What if compatibility isn't just about species?" Thea's eyes widened, a mix of emotions swirling in their depths. For a moment Thomas thought she might give in to whatever was building between them, but then she wrenched her hand away. "No," she said firmly. "It's impossible. And even if it weren't, I won't risk your life on some foolish human notion of heroism." With that, she pushed past him and out of the compartment, leaving Thomas alone with his tumultuous thoughts. The situation came to a head a week later. Thomas was in engineering when the ship suddenly lurched, nearly throwing him into a bank of controls. Alarms blared as the deck pitched beneath his feet. "What the hell was that?" he shouted to Zith over the din. The Valyrian scales had paled to a sickly green. "We've dropped out of warp," he growled, "and our nav systems are going haywire. We're flying blind." Thomas's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that Thea was behind this. Her condition must have progressed to the point where she could no longer control her abilities at all. He raced through the chaotic corridors, dodging panicked crew members and floating debris. He had to find her, had to stop this before it was too late. He burst onto the bridge to find a scene of utter chaos. Consoles sparked and fizzled, holographic displays flickered with nonsensical data, and in the center of it all stood Thea. She was surrounded by a nimbus of crackling energy, her hair whipping around her face as if caught in a storm. "Commander!" Thomas shouted, fighting against the maelstrom of energy. Surrounding her, "You have to stop this." Thea's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the storm seemed to intensify. Thomas was lifted off his feet, pulled inexorably toward her by an unseen force. "Stay back!" Thea cried, but there was more fear than command in her voice. I can't control it anymore." As Thomas drew closer, he could see the toll the Elsic had taken on her. Her proud features were drawn with pain and exhaustion, but beneath it all he saw something else. A desperate longing that mirrored his own. In that moment, Thomas made a decision. To hell with protocols, with cultural taboos, with the vast gulf between their species. He reached out, fighting against the psychic wind, and took Thea's face in his hands. "You don't have to control it," he said softly. "You just have to trust me." And then, throwing caution to the wind, he kissed her. The effect was instantaneous. The energy surrounding them exploded outward, knocking everyone else on the bridge off their feet. But Thomas and Thea remained locked together, oblivious to the chaos around them. As their lips met, Thomas felt a surge of something. Images, emotions, sensations not his own flooded his mind. He saw glimpses of Thea's life, her childhood on a world of crystalline spires, her rigorous training, the crushing weight of expectation that had always rested on her shoulders, and beneath it all, a loneliness that echoed his own. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, the bridge had fallen silent. Every eye was on them, a mix of shock, confusion, and in some cases, dawning understanding. Thea stared at Thomas, her eyes wide with wonder. How did you do that?" Thomas smiled, still a bit dazed himself. "I didn't do anything. We did it together." Before Thea could respond, a comm channel crackled to life. "Nebula Seeker, this is Galactic Union Command. We've detected severe anomalies in your ship's operations. Explain yourselves immediately." Thea straightened, some of her old commanding presence returning, but she didn't let go of Thomas's hand. "This is Commander Thea," she said, her voice steady. "We've experienced some unexpected complications, but I believe we've found a solution." She looked at Thomas, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. A most unconventional solution. As the bridge erupted into a flurry of activity, systems slowly coming back online, Thomas knew that their adventure was far from over. There would be explanations to give, protocols to navigate, and a whole new set of challenges to face. But as he stood there, hand in hand with Thea, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The universe, it seemed, still had plenty of surprises in store. The aftermath of the bridge incident was a whirlwind of debriefings, medical examinations, and intense communications with Galactic Union Command. Thomas found himself at the center of a storm of attention, scrutinized by everyone from the ship's junior officers to high-ranking alien diplomats. Through it all, Thea remained a constant presence at his side. Her condition had stabilized somewhat after their kiss, but both knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The Elsic still raged within her, held at bay by sheer force of will and whatever connection had sparked between them. It was during one particularly grueling vid call with Union brass that Thomas made his decision. As yet another pompous official droned on about protocols and interspecies taboos. He leaned over to Thea and whispered, "We need to talk, privately." She nodded, a flicker of something, hope, fear, crossing her face. Once alone in her quarters, Thomas took a deep breath. "I want to do the ritual," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "The Zirin mating ritual. All of it." Thea's eyes widened. "Thomas, you can't possibly understand what you're suggesting. The ritual is dangerous, even for Zircon. For a human, it could be fatal." "I understand the risks," Thomas insisted, "but I also understand what will happen if we do nothing. You'll die, Thea, and I can't let that happen." Thea turned away, her shoulders tense. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk your life for me? Is it just guilt? Some misplaced sense of duty?" Thomas moved closer, gently turning her.